Hello and good morning. It's me, Charlie, here with this week's weekly reading. We are currently reading two amazing books, The Mastery of Love by Miguel Ruiz and Career Self-Care by Minda Zetlin. I'm going to read we're on chapter 8 in both books this week. And then you can tune in while Heather and I discuss them with you on Mindset Monday. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, chapter 8, sex, the biggest demon in hell. If we could take humans out of the creation of the universe, we would see that the whole creation, the stars, the moon, the planets, the animals, everything is perfect just the way it is. Life doesn't need to be justified or judged. Without us, it keeps going the way it is. If you put humans in that creation, but take away the ability to judge, you will find we are exactly like the rest of nature. We are not good or bad or right or wrong. We are just the way we are. In the dream of the planet, we have the need to justify everything, to make everything good or bad or right or wrong, when it is just the way it is, period. Humans accumulate a lot of knowledge. We learn all those beliefs, morals, and rules from our family, society, religion, and we base most of our behavior, most of our feelings on that knowledge. We create angels and demons, and of course, sex becomes the biggest demon in hell. Sex is the biggest sin of the humans when the human body is made for sex. You are a biological sexual being, and that is the way it is. Your body is so wise. All that intelligence is in the genes, in the DNA. The DNA doesn't need to understand or justify everything, it just knows. The problem is not with sex. The problem is the way we manipulate the knowledge and our judgments when there is really nothing to justify. It's so hard for the mind to surrender, to accept that it is just the way it is. We have a whole set of beliefs about what sex should be, about how relationships should be, and those beliefs are completely distorted. In hell, we pay a high price for a sexual encounter, but the instinct is so strong that we do it anyway. When we have all that guilt, all that shame, we hear all that gossip about sex. Look at what this woman is doing. Ooh, look at that man. We have a whole definition of what a woman is, what a man is, how a woman should behave sexually, how a man should behave sexually. Men are always too macho or too wimpy, depending on who is judging. Women are always too thin or too fat. We have all these beliefs about how a woman should be in order to be beautiful. You have to buy the right clothes, create the right image, so you can be seductive and fit that image. If you don't fit that image of beauty, you grow up believing you are not worthy, that no one will like you. We believe so many lies about sex that we don't enjoy sex. Sex is for animals. Sex is evil. We should be ashamed to have sexual feelings. These rules about sex go completely against nature, and it's just a dream, but we believe it. Your true nature comes out, and it doesn't fit with all those rules. You are guilty. You are not what you should be. You are judged. You are victimized. You punish yourself, and it's not fair. This creates wounds that become infected with emotional poison. The mind plays this game, but the body doesn't care what the mind believes. The body just feels the sexual need. At a certain time in our lives, we cannot avoid feeling sexual attraction. This is completely normal. It is not a problem at all. The body is going to feel sexual when it's excited, when it's touched, when it's visually stimulated, when it sees the possibility of sex. The body can feel sexual and a few minutes later stop feeling sexual. If the stimulation ends, the body stops feeling the need for sex, but the mind is another story. Let's say that you are married and were raised as a Catholic. You have all those ideas about how sex should be, about what is good or bad or right or wrong, about what is a sin and what is acceptable. You need to sign a contract to make sex okay. If you don't sign the contract, sex is a sin. You have given your word to be loyal, but one day you're walking on the street and a man crosses in front of you. You feel a strong attraction. The body feels the attraction. There is no problem. It doesn't mean you will take any action, but you cannot avoid the feeling because it's completely normal. When the stimulation is gone, the body lets go, but the mind needs to justify what the body feels. The mind knows, and that's the problem. Your mind knows, you know, but what is it that you know? You know what you believe. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad, right or wrong, correct or incorrect. You are raised to believe this is bad, and right away you make that judgment. Now the drama and conflict begin. Later you think of that man, and just thinking of him makes your hormones go up again because of the powerful memory that's in the mind. It's as if your body is seeing him again. The body reacts because the mind thinks about it. If the mind would leave the body alone, that reaction would go away as if it never happened. But the mind remembers it. And because you know it's not okay, you start to judge yourself. The mind says it's not okay and tries to repress what it feels. When you try to repress your mind, guess what? You think about it more. When you see that man, and even if it's in a different situation, your body reacts more strongly. If the first time you had just let go of the judgment, perhaps you would see him the second time and you would have no reaction at all. Now you see the man, you have sexual feelings, and you judge these feelings and think, oh my God, it's not okay, I'm a terrible woman. You need to be punished, you are guilty, you are going in a downward spiral and for nothing, because it's all in the mind. Perhaps that man doesn't even notice that you exist. You start imagining the whole thing, you make assumptions, and you start to want him more. For whatever reason, you meet the man, you talk to him, and it's beautiful for you. It becomes an obsession. It's very attractive, but you are afraid. Then you make love to him, and it's the greatest thing and the worst thing at the same time. Now you really need to be punished. What kind of woman would allow her sexual desire to be greater than her morals? Who knows what games the mind is going to play? You hurt, but you try to deny your feelings. You try to justify your actions to avoid the emotional pain. Well, my husband is probably the same way. The attraction becomes stronger, but it's not because of your body. It's because the mind is playing a game. The fear becomes an obsession, and all that fear you have about your sexual attraction is building up. When you make love with this man, you have a great experience, but not because he is great and not because the sex is great, but because all the tension, all the fear is released. To build it up again, the mind plays the game, and it's because of that man, but it isn't true. The drama keeps growing, and it's nothing but a simple mental game. It's not even real. It's not love either, because this kind of relationship becomes very destructive. It is self-destructive because you are hurting yourself, and the place that hurts most is what you believe. It doesn't matter if your belief is right or wrong or good or bad, you're breaking your beliefs, which is something that we wish to do, but in the way of the spiritual warrior, not the way of the victim. Now you are going to use that experience to go deeper into hell, not to get out of hell. Your mind and your body have completely different needs, but your mind has control of your body. Your body has needs that you cannot avoid. You have to fulfill the need for food, the need for water, shelter, sleep, sex. All those needs of your body are completely normal, and it's so easy to satisfy the needs of the body. The problem is that the mind says, these are my needs. In the mind, we create a whole picture in this bubble of illusions, and the mind takes responsibility for everything. The mind thinks it has the need for food, for water, for shelter, for clothing, for sex. But the mind has no needs at all, no physical needs. The mind doesn't need food, doesn't need oxygen, doesn't need water, doesn't need sex at all. How do we know this is true? When your mind says, I need food, you eat, and the body is completely satisfied. But your mind still thinks it needs food. You keep eating and eating and eating, and you cannot satisfy your mind with food because that need is not real. The need to cover your body is another example. Yes, your body needs to be covered because the wind is too cold or because the sun is too hot, but it's your body that has the need, and it's so easy to satisfy the need. When the need is in the mind, you can have tons of clothes and the mind still needs clothes. You open the closet and it's full of clothes, but your mind isn't satisfied. What does it say? I have nothing to wear. The mind needs another car, another vacation, a guest house for your friends. All those needs that you never can fully satisfy are in the mind. Well, it's the same with sex. When the need is in the mind, you cannot satisfy the need. When the need is in the mind, the whole judgment, the whole knowledge is also there. This makes sex so difficult to deal with. The mind doesn't need sex. What the mind really needs is love, not sex. More than the mind, it's your soul that needs love, because your mind can survive with fear. Fear is energy also, and it's food for the mind. Not exactly the food you want, but it works. We need to give the body the freedom from the tyrant that is the mind. If we no longer have the need for food in our mind, the need for sex in our mind, everything becomes so easy. The first step is to split the needs into two categories. These are the needs of the body. These are the needs of the mind. The mind confuses the needs of the body with its own because the mind needs to know, what am I? We live in this world of illusion and we have no idea what we are. The mind creates all these questions. What am I? Becomes the biggest mystery, and any answer satisfies the need to feel safe. The mind says, I am the body. I am what I see, I am what I think, I am what I feel, I am hurting, I am bleeding. The affinity between the mind and the body is so close that the mind believes I am the body. The body has a need and the mind says, I need. The mind takes everything about the body personally because it tries to understand, what am I? So it is completely normal that the mind starts to gain control of the body at a certain point. And you live your life until something happens that shakes you and allows you to see what you are not. You start to become aware when you see what you are not, when your mind starts to realize that it is not the body. Your mind says, then what am I? Am I the hand? If I cut off my hand, am I still me? Then I am not the hand. You take away what is not you. Until the end, the only thing that remains is what you really are. It's a long process of the mind, finding its own identity. In the process, you let go of the personal story, what makes you feel safe, until finally you understand what you really are. You find out that you are not what you believe you are because you never choose your beliefs. These beliefs were there when you were born. You find out that you are also not the body because you start to function without your body. You start to notice that you are not the dream, that you are not the mind. If you go deeper, you start noticing that you are not the soul either. Then what you find out is so incredible. You find out that what you are is a force that makes it possible for your body to live, a force that makes it possible for your whole mind to dream. Without you, without this force, your body would collapse on the floor. Without you, your whole dream just dissolves into nothing. What you really are is that force that is life. If you look into the eyes of someone near you, you will see the self-awareness, the manifestation of life, shining in his eyes. Life is not the body. It is not the mind. It is not the soul. It is a force. Through this force, a newborn baby becomes a child, a teenager, an adult. It reproduces and grows old. When life leaves the body decomposes and turns to dust. You are life passing through your body, passing through your mind, passing through your soul. Once you find that out, not with the logic, not with the intellect, but because you can feel that life, you find out that you are the force that makes the flowers open and close, that makes the hummingbird fly from flower to flower. You find out that you are in every tree, you are in every animal, vegetable, and rock. You are the force that moves the wind and breathes through your body. The whole universe is a living being that is moved by that force, and that is what you are. You are life. And in Career Self-Care by Minda Zetlin, Chapter 8 today, we thrive, or at least survive, in an unequal world. On the day I turned 29, I happened to mention my birthday to my boss. Your biological clock is ticking, he told me. I had never discussed my personal life with him or whether I even wanted children. Looking back, I realized how offended and annoyed I was, but I was barely aware of it at the time. Instead, I forgot it quickly. For one thing, he was my boss at a job I loved at a time when jobs, especially in publishing, were hard to come by. Besides, that kind of thing happened and continues to happen all the time, like some sort of awful lava lamp. If you start paying attention to the sexism, racism, homophobia, ageism, and ableism all around you, it becomes difficult to see anything else. Without really thinking about it, I had trained myself not to notice. Maybe you've done that too. In the 1982 movie Tootsie, Dustin Hoffman plays out-of-work actor Michael Dorsey, who's so desperate for a part that he disguises himself as a woman and lands a role in a soap opera. Experiencing gender bias and sexual harassment for the first time, he chafes at things that most women just accept as part of normal life. In the scene that gave the movie its title, Michael, in his female persona of Dorothy, is told by the director, Tootsie, take 10. My name is Dorothy. He responds, it's not Tootsie or Toots or Sweetie or Honey or Doll. The men in the cast are always addressed by their names, she says. I have a name too. It's Dorothy, capital D-O-R-O-T-H-Y, Dorothy. A couple of years after the movie came out, I ordered business cards for myself for the first time. But when I went to pick them up, I discovered an error. The words freelance writer were written in the kind of script you'd expect on a wedding invitation, rather than the more professional serif font I'd selected. A male store employee who presumably never saw Tootsie argued that I should just accept the cards as they were, apparently believing that a patronizing tone peppered with endearments like honey and sweetie would somehow count me into giving in. After about the fourth one of those, I finally turned it back on him. Sweetheart, dearie, darling, honey pie, you're going to have to fix it, I said. It's a moment I remember clearly, decades later, only because it was so damn satisfying. I had called him out on his demeaning language and his shoddy service and let him know I wouldn't be patronized, all in a single sentence. He redid the order without further objection. While writing this chapter, I came across an interview Dustin Hoffman gave about Tootsie years later to the American Film Institute. He said he hadn't wanted to make the movie unless he could convincingly pass as female, so he asked the studio to do some makeup tests and see. When he saw himself done up as Dorothy on screen, he said, I was shocked that I wasn't more attractive, and I said, now that you have me looking like a woman, now make me a beautiful woman. That's as good as it gets, the makeup artist told him. It was at that moment that I had an epiphany, Hoffman recalls. I went home and started crying, talking to my wife. He realized that if he had met Dorothy at a party, he wouldn't have bothered talking to her because she wasn't beautiful. There are too many interesting women I have not had the experience to know in this life because I have been brainwashed, he said, cheering up right there in the interview. That was never a comedy for me. Not much has changed since then. The presumption that a woman must be beautiful or else she's worthless is still very much with us. In Michelle and Barack Obama's twin memoirs about their time in the White House, both relate that on the day of a public appearance, Michelle would have to wake up hours earlier than her husband so she could undergo the lengthy process of having her hair and makeup done. And she wrote, the same was true for every woman in public life. At the time I was reading Michelle Obama's book, then British Prime Minister Theresa May was struggling to navigate Brexit, the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union, something no nation had ever done before. The news was full of images of May seated behind the Prime Minister's desk, writing letters to EU leaders or talking to the press outside 10 Downing Street. She was always perfectly made up, stylishly but conservatively dressed, her graying hair coiffed just so. You might think the leader of a nation with the 6th biggest economy and the 8th mightiest military on earth might have better things to worry about than making sure her hair and makeup were perfect before starting work in the morning. Being judged on our appearance and considered worthless if unattractive is just one way the mere fact of being female puts women at a disadvantage. Here's another. Unpaid labor. Unpaid labor refers to all the things we do without pay because they need to get done, such as childcare, house cleaning, cooking, yard work, caring for sick relatives, and so on. Studies show that unpaid labor falls disproportionately on women in every nation in the world. There's not a single one where such work is evenly divided between men and women. When women do the biggest share of unpaid labor in the poorest countries, so you might think they do the least in the richest one, the United States, but that's not true. The progressive nations of Scandinavia have the closest thing to parity. In Norway, men spend an average of 3 hours a day on unpaid labor, while women spend an average of 3.5. In the United States, men spend 2.5 hours a day on unpaid labor, while women spend more than 4. This means, on average, women do 7 years more of unpaid work than men over their lifetimes. Melinda Gates wrote in her book, The Moment of Lift, how empowering women changes the world. It's about the time it takes to complete a bachelor's and a master's degree. All these statistics were compiled before the COVID-19 pandemic. However, since then, social scientists report the disproportionate burden on women has worsened. You don't need statistics to tell you that, though it's been obvious in Zoom meetings where women working from home have struggled to keep up while simultaneously homeschooling the kids. It's also been obvious in the way the pandemic disproportionately drove women from the workforce, not only because the high-touch service jobs we tend to do have disappeared in larger numbers, but also because so many women simply couldn't continue working when there was no school and no daycare. One surprising analysis by the National Women's Law Center found that the number of jobs lost by women was equal to 100% of the net U.S. jobs lost in December 2020. For those of us who still have jobs, the workplace is an unlevel playing field, just as it's always been. Taking the gender wage gap, a phenomenon that's been recorded since the 1960s. In 2010, women earned just over 77 cents for every dollar earned by men in the United States. According to the National Committee on Pay Equity, in the years since then, women's pay has risen all the way to 82 cents on the dollar. At that rate, it would take more than 50 years to achieve equal pay, but it will probably be longer because the gap is shrinking more and more slowly over time. However, much white women may be held back by gender bias in the work world that inequality is exponentially worse for Black women and other women of color. Women overall may earn 82 cents for every dollar earned by men, but Black women, that number is a depressing 63 cents. This may not sound like a lot of money, but over a 40-year career, on average, Black women will earn nearly $1 million less than white men by the time they retire. For Hispanic and Native American women, the gap is even larger. There's a Black Women's Equal Pay Day every year, the symbolic date until which Black women must keep working in order to be paid what white men made in the previous calendar year in 2021. That day was August 3rd. An even bigger problem than the pay gap is how women are seen and how we see ourselves in the workplace. In 2017, Google engineer James Damore started a furor in the tech world with a memo questioning the company's badly needed diversity effort and opining that the absence of women in high-paying tech jobs resulted from hormones rather than bias. I'm simply stating that the distribution of preferences and abilities of men and women differ in part due to biological causes, and that these differences may explain why we don't see equal representation of women in tech and leadership, he wrote. 4 years later, while after Damore was fired for his memo, it still fills me with fury for the way it stupidly or willingly ignores the many ways, both subtle and overt, women are told that we belong in the workplace, but always in a secondary role. Just how companies communicate this became painfully clear when some clever researchers at Stanford University decided to test their theory that women weren't being welcomed into high-tech jobs by the simple method of attending recruiting sessions aimed at the university's STEM graduates. Stanford graduates with technology degrees are some of the most sought-after college graduates in the world. At the time of the study, unemployment was at a historical low, and companies reported that a lack of employees with the skills they needed was the primary obstacle to their growth. So these recruiters had a good reason to want every single graduate they met to apply for a job, and they acted like it. They handed out gifts, they promised lavish salaries and perks, and yet they still made the female students unwelcome. In most of these situations, the researchers observed men made the presentations, women often introduced by their first names only, stood in the back and handed out the gifts or snacks. Sometimes a female engineer from the company would be present at the recruiting session, but if so, she never gave a presentation. In one session, the lone female engineer repeatedly attempted to answer a question from the audience, but she was cut off each time by a male engineer who talked over her. And as the researchers watched, many female students in those sessions got up and left before the end. The message that they weren't wanted had been received loud and clear. This is the sort of reason I, and so many women like me, have spent our careers being careful not to look at that awful lava lamp. Once you do, it's impossible to stop seeing gender bias everywhere. There's emotional labor, the work of organizing meals, planning get-togethers, and giving gifts, the things that make workplaces and families feel livable and connected, which is mostly performed by women. There's the pink tax, the average 7% higher price tag on products marketed to women compared to the same products marketed to men. And I recently came across a Consumer Report study that found women are more likely than men to be seriously injured in a car accident because automobile safety features are designed with men's bodies in mind. There's not a tiny corner of the world anywhere, not even behind the wheel of her own car, where a woman can expect equal treatment. But this book about solving problems and making both your work life and your actual life more successful and happier. So what can you do about all of this? I've struggled with that question quite a bit because there are no really good answers. We shouldn't have to live in a world where our lives and our careers take on extra layers of difficulty and danger because of our gender, race, sexual orientation, age, accent, religion, background, or physical ability. But this is the world we're in, and there aren't any others to choose from. So while I can't tell you how to fix our unequal world, it may help if you avoid doing a few specific things. Don't assume you're getting fair treatment. In chapter 3, I wrote about how upset I was when my then boyfriend got a raise that made his salary much higher than mine. Here's the question I would ask my younger self if I could. You were a proud feminist who marched for women's rights. Why did it never occur to you that the explanation for his getting a higher salary than you when you'd worked for the company a year longer was simply this? He was a man and you were not. Back then, the owners of the company and its most senior executives were male. Women ran human resources and managed the office, the same job my mother had at her company. Everything else was overseen by men. Years later, I would learn the distinction between line areas and staff areas in a company. Line areas were those that produced or sold the company's actual products, such as sales, marketing, operations, and so on. Staff areas were the functions the company needs to stay open, things like HR, legal, and facilities. Staff functions would always be subservient because they were only there to support the line function, where all the power was. Staff areas in the company where I worked, as well as most other companies I encountered, were more frequently headed by women than line areas. Why didn't I see all this back then? Why didn't I even consider the possibility that gender bias was behind our respective salaries? Probably because I was emotionally tied up in my work. I couldn't bear the thought that the company I loved was paying me unfairly for the job I loved. Instead, I wore blinders that I put on myself. Don't make the same mistake. Don't blame yourself. A few years ago, when I learned that a male colleague was being paid more than me for regular articles when, once again, I'd been doing the work longer than he had, I didn't let myself think about gender bias, or at least not in the usual way. Instead, here's what I told myself. He did a better job of negotiating the contract than I did. He's better at that because he's a man and men are good at understanding and demanding what they're worth. I allowed them to pay me less than I'm worth, and therefore it's my fault. Now that I've written it out, I'm amazed at the mental acrobatics I went through to convince myself that being underpaid was not a matter of gender bias. Even though I knew the statistics about equal pay, and yet my reasoning was true as far as it went. In my experience, men do indeed do a better job of negotiating on their own behalf, especially when it comes to money. But why is that? It's easy to assume that the culprit is our upbringing, in which girls are often taught to avoid being overly assertive. We're also discouraged from talking about money and are encouraged to assume that the men we marry will do the lion's share of the earning. But while it's easy to assume this is the problem, the evidence shows otherwise. Research on 46,000 randomly chosen employees in Australia, which keeps better records than the United States, of who ask for raises and whether they get them, found out that women ask for raises just as often as men do. But women get the raises they ask for 15% of the time, compared with 20% of the time for men. In other words, women ask for a raise, they're more likely to be turned down. And that's not all. Academics who've studied the issue in depth told the New York Times that when women ask for more money, the person they ask is likely to view them negatively as demanding and therefore unfeminine. In other words, there's just no way to get it right. Asking for what you know you're worth means you'll be seen as unfeminine or brash. Not asking means being paid less than you deserve and continuing to live with a gender wage gap forever. Meanwhile, the ugly truth is that most companies depend on the gender wage gap to stay profitable. Most employees don't have it in their budget to give their female employees a 20% raise. All of this sucks. Don't make it worse by blaming yourself like I did. Don't hold yourself back. A frequently quoted internal study at HP found that women only apply for a job when they meet 100% of the stated qualifications, whereas men will apply if they meet 60%. Considering that it's from an internal study at one high-tech company and not necessarily representative of the workforce overall, why does the statistic get talked about so much? Because it's one of those numbers that feels both significant and true. When I encounter a statistic that shows women are deliberately holding themselves back in the workplace? I think, of course we are. When the study came out, women's leadership expert Tara Moore decided to dig in further. She asked more than 1,000 women and men this question. If you decided not to apply for a job because you didn't meet all the qualifications, why didn't you apply? By a wide margin, the most common answer for all respondents was that they thought they wouldn't get the job. That's revealing. Moore wrote in an article for the Harvard Business Review. First, it shows it's not a lack of confidence in their own abilities that's holding women back. In fact, only 10% of women said they chose not to apply because they thought they couldn't do the job well. What's holding them back is the belief that they can't get the job in the first place, so why waste their time and set themselves up for rejection? They thought that the required qualifications were, well, required qualifications, Moore wrote. They didn't see the hiring process as one where advocacy, relationships, or a creative approach to framing one's expertise could overcome not having the skills and experiences outlined in the job qualifications. What held them back from applying was not the mistaken perception about themselves, but a mistaken perception about the hiring process. Well, maybe there are two different ways to interpret this statistic. One is that women are indeed holding themselves back by not applying for jobs that they could very possibly get. Another is that women accurately expect that if they apply for a job, they'll be held to a very high standard, and so they'd better be perfectly qualified or maybe overqualified if they expect to get hired. Which interpretation is true? LinkedIn shed some light on this question by performing a statistical analysis on the billions of hiring interactions that take place on its platform and conducting a follow-up surveys. Consistent with the HP report, LinkedIn found that women applied to 20% fewer jobs than men did, and were 16% less likely to apply to a job after viewing it. But it also found women might be right to assume there's gender bias in hiring. Recruiters who search LinkedIn profiles when they have a job to fill are 13% more likely to click on a man's profile than a woman's when it comes up in their search results. Once they've reviewed a profile, they're also slightly less likely to contact a woman than a man and invite them to apply. On the other hand, women who apply for a job are 16% more likely to be hired and 18% more likely if the job is in senior management. This might sound like pro-female gender bias, but of course it only makes sense when you consider, at least based on the HP study, that the female applicants for any given job are more likely to be 100% qualified than the male ones. Then again, you may want to ignore all of this research and just go after the jobs you want. In 2018, Seattle journalist Jody Allard wondered what would happen if a woman were to job hunt like a man. She decided to find out by conducting the experiment on herself. She hoped to leave her current job quickly and had been spending long hours on the search for new employment. But she realized her own behavior matched HP's findings. Despite my eagerness to view a new position, I found myself applying only to jobs I was extremely qualified for and in some cases overqualified. She wrote in an article for The Lily, which is published by the Washington Post. So she decided to change that. She couldn't quite bring herself to apply for a job if she was only 60% qualified, but if she was 70 or 80%, she would go for it, regardless of title or level, she wrote. At first, she felt elated. There were so many more jobs out there that she could try for. Almost as quickly, emotional discomfort set in. I found myself battling a monster-sized case of imposter syndrome, she wrote. I sent psychic apologies as I applied for jobs that weren't 100% up my alley, barely restraining myself from emailing actual apologies. But to Allard's surprise, the strategy worked. She soon had phone interviews lined up with 12 different companies. One was for a director-level job, the most senior role she'd applied for. Partway through that interview, the recruiter said, "I'm not sure you have the skills I'm hiring for." Allard thought the gig was up, but then the recruiter continued, "But maybe that's not the most important thing. The recruiter invited Allard in to meet the rest of the team and then offered her the job. That may be the most important lesson here. There's a bias out there, of course there is. But if you decide not to let your own insecurity or your negative expectations slow you down, really good things can happen. Don't hide who you are, at least no more than you have to. A member of Inc. magazine's solopreneur community and former member of the military was assigned to teach a leadership lesson to military supervisors. Before the class began, an experienced female teacher warned her about the penalty for being nice and advised her to start out the course with a very strict response to any sort of disruption in the classroom. She was warned that if she didn't immediately get the class in hand, a handful of students would disrupt the class for the entire course. Our future solopreneur decided to follow that advice, and she started out her course being very tough and quickly correcting anyone who was at all disrespectful. The course went well, she got great feedback, and she built lasting relationships with some of her students. Later on, she passed the same advice along to a new female instructor who didn't take the suggestion and was too nice. Her classroom was constantly disrupted, and she received negative feedback because of it. Being a woman in the workplace, especially in a leadership role, means constantly wondering how you're coming across. Are you too much of a pushover, or do others think of you as a bitch? An insult that can only be leveled at women because you're being too pushy. Women are constantly striving to find the appropriate middle ground between pushover and bitch. Like fretting over your looks that sucks up energy that could be better spent elsewhere. Like the pay gap. This business of not being able to be yourself is a problem that exponentially worse for women of color. A couple of years ago, I interviewed a Black entrepreneur named Jessica Egger who, when her first child was born, was working as an executive at a company in Florida. I was always told that I'd have to work twice as hard as a Black woman to get anywhere close to what others had. So I'd make sure to be the first one in and the last one out, answer emails at all hours of the night, and get more work done than anyone else. She said, when I had Oliver, I knew I still wanted to work and be an amazing parent, but figuring out how to balance that was extremely difficult. Eggert was working for a fast-growing company, and she knew she had a lot of potential for advancement here. At the same time, she said, I knew I was going to have to work hard to be seen as someone who belonged there, especially in leadership. She had observed the company's attitude toward working mothers, and it was clear from our interactions with clients and with other employees that there wasn't a lot of respect for women in the workplace, especially moms. They weren't given opportunities to move up, and I would hear, oh, she needs to go home early for the kids. So when she returned from maternity leave, she became a stealth mom. She displayed no pictures of her son anywhere around her workspace. She put fictitious meetings on her calendar to hide the fact that she had to spend a few minutes pumping breast milk, which she would do sitting on the floor of the ladies' room because there was nowhere else. All of this was extremely stressful, and her milk dried up within a few weeks. By the time her second child was born, Eggert had left that company, moved to a different state, and started a business of her own, where she could decide what was and wasn't acceptable for a mother with a new baby. And what about those male executives who disapproved of working mothers and disparaged women who had to pick their kids up at daycare or school? I'm willing to bet that many of them had children of their own, and the only reason they themselves didn't leave early to care for those children was that they had women in their lives who did it for them. Women who were part of the $10.9 trillion unpaid dollars labor economy. Eggert felt that hiding her true self was the price she had to pay to succeed at her job, and she was likely right. But there's something very, very wrong with this picture. Why should someone who is doing her job well have to pretend having a child doesn't matter in order to prove that she belongs there? Why isn't her work proof enough? In the startup world where I spend much of my work life, a lot depends on the decisions of VCs, venture capitalists, who pick which startups to bless with their millions, their advice, and perhaps most valuable of all, their connections. VC funding is notoriously biased. In 2019, the percentage of VC investments that went to women-led startups reached an all-time high. That high was 2.8%. In 2020, thanks to the pandemic and the resulting economic crisis, VCs cut back on funding, at least where female founders were concerned. So the percentage of funding to women-owned businesses went back down to 2%. That's bad enough. But then consider that Black female founders got 0.27% of VC funding in 2018 and 2019, and Latina founders got 0.37%. VC investors often say that they bet on the founder rather than the product or company they are building. On the surface, this seems wise. Often in business, great execution trumps a great idea, and a founder who's already started a successful company is much more likely to succeed again. But look below the surface, and you'll see this is a convenient excuse for VCs to give funds to people they feel more comfortable with or like better. Investing in startups is such a crapshoot to begin with. Many more fail than succeed. That it's easy to imagine there's some sort of alchemy to it, and that alchemy is known to wizards who resemble, say, Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates. Think I'm exaggerating about this? There's a New York Times interview with Y Combinator founder Paul Graham that shows how literally true this is. Graham is to VCs as Eric Clapton is to rock guitarists. The interview described Y Combinator's efforts to figure out why it invested in some companies that it shouldn't have. I can be tricked by anyone who looks like Mark Zuckerberg, Graham said. There was a guy once who we funded who was terrible. I said, how could he be bad? He looks like Zuckerberg. It's particularly galling that VCs operate this way when their industry claims to be data-driven. If only that were true, they'd be doing the opposite. A Boston Counseling Group study from 2018 found that investors who backed startups led by women did better than those who backed those led by men. In fact, female-led startups returned twice as much on the dollar as their male-led counterparts. Why don't they seem to see that? For one thing, most VCs get into that line of work because they've been successful founders in their own right. They're likely tempted to invest in people who remind them of themselves, which means this is a perpetually repeating cycle. Young white men investing in young white men, who, if they're successful, come back to invest in more young white men. If you're a woman, chances are you can't walk into a meeting with a potential investor or employer and convince anyone that you look like Mark Zuckerberg. But can you push back against bias at home and at work and perhaps change it just a little bit? What if you called out bias when you saw it? What if you demanded that the man in your life start doing half the unpaid labor around your home? What would happen if you simply stopped doing more than your fair share? I'm dreaming here. I realize that none of this can change overnight, and maybe it never will. In the meantime, if you're earning less than a male colleague, if a man gets promoted over you, or if someone fails to take you seriously, or makes an inappropriate comment about your biological clock, don't do what I did. Don't sweep it out of your mind, don't ignore it, and whatever else you do, don't blame yourself. In September 2021, a former intern at the Pentagon named Maya Guzar published an essay in the New York Times describing a highly unpleasant incident at a cocktail party in which a senior employee cornered her, asking inappropriate questions about her ethnicity and partying habits, and finally lunged at her until a male officer pushed him away. She believed that reporting the incident to the higher-ups would only wind up hurting her, and so she decided to let it go. That night when I returned home, I began to downplay the incident in my mind, she wrote. I watched with almost cynical detachment as I began gaslighting myself. I'm overreacting, I told myself. It wasn't that big of a deal. Unfortunately for Gudzar, there had been over a dozen witnesses to the event, some of whom were in positions of authority, and assured her that it was indeed a very big deal. Too many of us have spent too much time assuring ourselves that words or acts of sexism or racism or hate, things that reduce our own humanity, really are no big deal. We tell ourselves this because we want to stay in places we love, in jobs we love, with people we love. We want to earn money for ourselves and for our loved ones. We want our career dreams to come true. From love, we tell ourselves whatever we need to do in order to stay. We do these things because we have to, because this is the world we live in. Maybe someday our daughters and granddaughters will change it into a better one. Exercises to try. Number 1, speak up for your female colleagues. Women working in the Obama White House often found themselves ignored or talked over in meetings. Their ideas were overlooked only to be proposed later by men to great approval. When that kind of thing happens, there's no way to say, "You mean that thing I just said 10 minutes ago?" without sounding peevish, but they realized others can do it for you. So several of them formed a pact, agreeing that whenever any of them proposed an idea or a solution in a meeting, the others would repeat and validate it, making it harder for anyone present to forget who said it first. You can try this too, or with or without a formal agreement with the other women who work with you. Number 2, don't accept unacceptable behavior. Just because bad behavior is common, that doesn't mean you have to put up with it. In 2017, software engineer Susan Fowler set the stage for the #MeToo movement when she published a lengthy account of being sexually harassed on the job, titled "Reflecting on One Very, Very Strange Year at Uber." The following day, another female Uber engineer, Amy Lusato, wrote a response titled "Reflecting on Susan Fowler's Reflections." The main point of this response was that sexual harassment in Silicon Valley was commonplace and not restricted to Uber. Lucido recounted an incident that occurred when she was a 20-year-old intern at Google and a 30-year-old manager at a party tried to corner her in a bedroom, supposedly so they could play Go. She wrote that she forced him back out into the common area where he proceeded to follow her around, saying mushy and inappropriate things while getting extremely drunk. At the time, we thought it was hilarious, she said. In fact, we thought this was so funny that we spent weeks joking about it. In retrospect, she no longer found it amusing. In a weird way, Luceto's reaction to Fowler and others speaking out about harassment and bias reminds me of my own. Not that I ever thought any of this stuff was funny. Not my boss's comment about my biological clock, not his offhand remark that you could never really trust a woman to return from maternity leave, and not any of the other daily reminders that a woman in the workplace could never be on the same footing as a man. All of this felt like a normal part of being in the work world, part of the air around us, and not worth remarking on. So when Fowler and others spoke up, I kept thinking, wait a minute, you mean we're allowed to object to this? We certainly are. And moreover, inappropriate behavior will only change when more of us object to it. With that in mind, I'm asking you to look right at the lava lamp. Look for gender bias, harassment, racism, homophobia, and all other forms of prejudice wherever you are, even though that will mean seeing it everywhere all the time. And then, this is the really hard part, call attention to it as often as you can. People will roll their eyes, they may accuse you of not focusing on what's important. In these uncivil times, they might even make fun of you. Do it anyway. It's the only way to move the needle, even if it's just a tiny bit. Thank you for joining us for this week's weekly reading. So glad you tuned in. Go ahead and pick up your copy of The Mastery of Love by Miguel Ruiz and For Your Self-Care by Minda Zetlin, and follow along as we work through them together. We'll see you on Mindset Monday. Namaste.
The Marysville Police Foundation is a 501c3 organization to support these areas of the Marysville Police Department: law enforcement, officer wellness, and the community outreach programs and activities. We look forward to serving.
We take the mystery and pain out of social media consistency for your business, giving you back time to shine in your zone of genius. Social media is the new branding. It deserves its own attention, thought, and effort. Yet so few businesses actually take this seriously and invest enough time on their strategy. We can do it for you at an affordable rate that will fit into your budget and allow you to pursue other revenue channels as well. The hardest part of social media management is keeping up the consistency to be seen and know what to post, when to post. Are you ready to have everything ready to go for you, saving you time and energy by not having to do it all yourself? Still getting your message out so that people get to know you, like you, and develop trust while opening yourself up to more time for the business of your business where you shine. Working with Women in Leadership, BSMB LLP, is a unique experience that bridges the gap from face-to-face to virtual relationship marketing. Not only do we love to help you shine on social media, we love to share tools to help you grow with us, body, soul, mind, and business. Check out our podcast and YouTube channel for Mindset Mondays, Social Media Training Wednesdays, business interviews and special topics on Fridays, and weekly readings on Sundays. To schedule your consultation or podcast interview, head to our website, www.womeninleadershipbsmb.com. Our weekly readings on Sunday, our podcast, Mindset Monday, social media training with Heather on Wednesdays with a live Q&A, guest interviews, and special topics on Fridays. Thank you for joining us. Find out more and schedule with us online at www.womeninleadershipbsmb.com, where you have a spot at the table.